I always thought the woods around our family cabin were peaceful, the kind of place where the loudest sound is the wind through the trees or the distant call of an owl. But that calm shattered the moment Karen, my older sister, whispered, "There's someone inside." What happened next still gives me chills. We weren't even supposed to be at the cabin that weekend. My parents had planned to stay until Sunday, but things changed last minute, and we ended up arriving Saturday evening instead. As we pulled into the driveway, something felt ... off. The porch light was on, which was strange, since Dad always made a point to leave everything off to save power. But it wasn't just the light. The back door was slightly open. That door never gets left open. Karen was the first to notice the shadow move past the window. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she immediately called 911. I remember her voice shaking. As she told the dispatcher someone was inside, that we thought the cabin was empty. But it clearly wasn't. The next few minutes felt like forever. We waited outside, the car doors locked, hearts pounding. My younger brother kept asking if it was maybe just a bear, or maybe someone from the nearby hiking trail who got lost. But deep down, I think we all knew this was different. Just as the police sirens started echoing through the woods, the door creaked open, and that's when someone stepped out. It wasn't a burglar. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone we knew. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there, and definitely not supposed to be alone in the dark. What they said next made Karen drop her phone. And I swear, the forest itself went silent. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of something we never expected. Something we're still trying to make sense of. And trust me, what we found inside the cabin afterward, that changed everything. It was Uncle Ray. He stepped out of the cabin slowly, like he was expecting us, like he knew we were coming. He hadn't said a word yet, just stared at each of us with this weird, blank look. Karen was frozen. My mom kept whispering, "What is he doing here?" Under her breath. We hadn't seen Uncle Ray in over 2 years, not since that big fallout with Dad. Last we heard, he moved out west and didn't want contact with anyone. So why was he standing there, in the middle of the woods, inside our family cabin? The police pulled up before we could say anything else. They asked who called, and Karen quickly explained everything. How we thought someone broke in. How the lights were on. How none of this made sense. Uncle Ray finally spoke, telling the officers he was invited, that Dad had given him the keys. But Dad looked just as confused as the rest of us. "No, I didn't," he said, his voice low and tense. "You weren't even supposed to know we still came up here." That's when the questions started, and not just from the cops. Uncle Ray kept saying things that didn't add up. He said he'd only been there a few hours, but the fireplace was still warm, and there were empty food wrappers in the trash. He claimed he was sleeping in the guest room, but Karen swore she saw a figure move in the main bedroom window. And then, the weirdest part, a padlock on the basement door. We'd never locked the basement before. There was no reason to. But now, a heavy lock hung there like it was, guarding something. Something important. None of us said it out loud. But we all felt it. Something wasn't right. Uncle Ray kept dodging questions. He acted like everything was normal, like this was just some big mix-up. But the look in his eyes, that still, almost too calm look, made my skin crawl. We hadn't even unpacked yet. But suddenly, it felt like we'd stepped into someone else's story. Or worse, someone else's plan. The cops eventually left after checking IDs and making sure nothing looked technically illegal. They said it was a family matter and left us to figure it out. As their cruiser disappeared down the gravel road, the silence felt heavier. We were stuck in the middle of the woods, miles from town, with a man none of us fully trusted. Dad tried to keep it calm, but his jaw was clenched. "Why are you really here, Ray?" he asked. Uncle Ray just shrugged and said he wanted to reconnect, But the timing didn't make sense. Why now, after all this time? Why show up when we weren't even supposed to be here? Mom didn't say much, but she kept glancing toward the basement door. I could tell it was bothering her. Later that night, after everyone went to bed, or at least pretended to, I saw her try the lock. Still sealed. No key in sight. When she turned and saw me watching, she just whispered, "Don't tell your dad." That's when I realized this wasn't just about Ray. Something else had happened before. Something none of us kids were told. Meanwhile, Karen was going through old photos in the living room, trying to calm down. She said she found one that didn't belong. A printed picture tucked between two frames, and it wasn't even ours. It showed the cabin, but from the woods, like someone had taken it from a distance. A shadowy figure was barely visible near the porch. She didn't recognize the person, but she was sure it wasn't from any trip we'd taken. The next morning, things got even stranger. Uncle Ray was already up, making coffee like he'd never left. He acted completely normal, but no one else did. Every conversation was clipped, every movement careful. My little brother asked why we couldn't just go home, but deep down, I think we were all scared to leave. Scared of what we might be walking away from. Something was off with this place now. With Ray, with whatever was behind that locked door, and whether we wanted to admit it or not, we were already in too deep. That night, the wind picked up hard. Trees groaned outside, and the cabin creaked like it was breathing. None of us could sleep. Not really. I kept hearing sounds, soft footsteps, something shifting downstairs. I wanted to believe it was just the storm, but deep down, I knew better. Karen finally had enough. Around midnight, she knocked on my door, flashlight in hand. "We need to see what's in the basement," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I followed her down the hallway, our footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. The rest of the cabin was dark, except for the faint blue glow of the fireplace. Uncle Ray was nowhere in sight. Neither was Mom. That only made things worse. The lock on the basement door still held tight, but Karen had grabbed a screwdriver and a coat hanger. We worked on it quietly, nervous with every creak, afraid of being caught. After a few tense minutes, the lock finally snapped open. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing steep steps leading into darkness. Cold air rushed up at us, not just cold like the basement always was, but wrong. Heavy. Karen turned on her flashlight, and we stepped down slowly, one step at a time. The basement looked normal at first. Old furniture, boxes, dusty shelves. But then we saw a tarp in the corner, something hidden underneath. Karen froze. "Did Dad store anything down here recently?" I shook my head. We both knew that tarp hadn't been there last summer. As we got closer, the basement lights suddenly flicked on, not from us, but from upstairs. Someone was standing at the top of the stairs. We couldn't see the face, just the silhouette. Frozen, staring down at us, Karen turned off the flashlight. We stood still, barely breathing, waiting for whoever it was to make the next move. That's when the person slowly stepped down, one foot hitting the wooden stair, then another. And that's when we finally heard the voice. But it wasn't Ray, and it wasn't Dad either. The voice was quiet, almost too soft to recognize at first. But then it said, "You shouldn't have come back." And Karen's hand gripped mine so tight, I thought she'd break my fingers. We both knew that voice. It was our cousin Jenna, who, as far as we knew, hadn't been seen by anyone in almost a year. She stepped into the light slowly, her face pale and thinner than we remembered. Her clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in days. Maybe longer. Karen started to say something, but Jenna held up a hand. "Don't," she said. "They'll hear you." They? I asked, barely able to get the word out. Before she could answer, there was a loud thud above us. Then another, heavy footsteps pacing the floor. Jenna rushed forward and yanked the tarp off the corner. Underneath wasn't furniture or tools. It was a stack of old notebooks, a lantern, and a backpack with food stuffed inside, like someone had been living down here. Hiding, Jenna pulled us into the corner and whispered, "I never left. Uncle Ray said he'd help me, but he lied. I've been trapped down here, watching, listening." Karen's eyes were wide with panic. "Why didn't you tell anyone? We thought you ran away. Mom said you left after the fight." Jenna shook her head. "I tried. But every time I got close, something happened. Power would go out. Phones stopped working. Ray would show up, calm like always, but he knew. He always knew. That's when we heard a new sound. Not footsteps this time. Voices, 2 of them. One was definitely Uncle Ray's, but the other sounded like Dad, calm, measured. Like nothing was wrong, Jenna backed into the shadows. "He's not what you think," she said. "Neither of them are." My heart sank. Everything we thought. We knew about our family, the cabin, what was real. All of it cracked open in that moment. Karen looked at me, whispering, "If Dad's in on this," I couldn't answer. Because deep down, I was starting to believe it to Garen, and I froze as the basement door creaked open again. This time, both Ray and Dad were coming down. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs, slow and deliberate. We crouched behind the shelving unit. Jenna pressed between us, barely breathing. The lantern in her hands flickered slightly, casting just